What's that? You want to make a game in your favorite new game engine? Well, I got a tutorial for you. That's right, you can put a shoot man in a room with another shoot man, and they'll shoot man each other until they both die of acute shoot manitis. Now that's a game. The only folks who wouldn't like that are nerds that want to develop the next Pokemon title. I mean, I'm not that much of a nerd. I'd settle for Persona. Really, I just don't like action titles. It doesn't really matter what sort of action it is. I just don't like, moving. I like systems and numbers and thinking about how things relate. So, yeah, I want to create games with complicated systems. But it doesn't appear that any tutorial folk want to do that. They don't seem to have any interest in it. If you were to look up indie devs who are trying to develop a new systems-based game in a modern engine, the next new Pokemon title, you're probably going to find that they have followed those tutorials, and their idea of how to develop the next big Pokemon-style game is to have a really cool-looking trainer in some really pretty grass with a really cool monster over here, and then the two of them meet up, and then there's battle music, and the screen flashes, and the dev comes on and says, "Follow our Patreon for exclusive content." That's bad. Do not start with the UI. I mean, if you want to mock it up for art direction purposes, sure, go ahead. But don't implement it first. Especially not at that high of a level. This is a really common mistake that indie devs make, and I can explain it in excruciating detail, both what causes it and what the fallout is. Let's get excruciating! You see, like most indie devs, I am inspired by the games I play. If I were to play Pokemon, I might say, "Oh man, that was great. I want to make a My Pokemon game." If I play Persona, I'm like, "Cool, let's make my Persona. My Persona." But as a gamer, the way we look at these games is very specific to our gaming experience. If we spend 100 hours in Pokemon, 99 of those hours are spent in the UI, wandering the world map, being in battles, selecting things from drop-down lists, UI stuff. It's natural for us to interpret this game as being made of UI. That's our experience. So when we switch over to being indie devs, when we put our indie dev hat on, it's natural for us to assume that we can make a better Pokemon by making a prettier set of UI. Our world map has real-time shadows. Obviously, our Pokemon will be better because it's prettier. This is not a very useful standpoint if you are a game dev. Obviously, you do want to have a good UI, but making that UI the foundation of your design is really pretty iffy because it means that you're trying to move out in every direction from the UI. For example, you're trying to figure out what underlying mechanics there are that are supported by this UI, how various things relate to each other underneath this UI. You're trying to reverse engineer the systems part of the game for a game that doesn't actually exist. To make matters worse, UI is notoriously not stable and will constantly change over the course of your development. So not only are you trying to go out in every direction from the UI, but the UI is constantly changing under your feet. I see this happen all the time. Like, you'll see someone start up a Patreon, they'll be like, 4 months in, they'll have started with something cool, but it'll still be exactly where it was 4 months ago to outside observers. And all the players are like, "What the hell, dude? You promised that we were going to have, like, monsters and shit." And the dev is like, "I've got all these cool monster meshes, but when I try to put them in the game, it all goes wrong." And the players are like, "God, you're such a lazy jerk. You're just taking money and sitting on it." And the dev's like, "No, No, I swear I'm working really hard. It's just way more complicated than I thought. I guess I suck at game dev. No, man, you don't suck at game dev. You just started in the worst possible spot and tried to go in every direction at once. Yeah, obviously, it didn't work out. That's not how you make a game, not if you want to finish it. Even if these games manage to get through this phase, they usually end up being very, very bland because they tried to reverse engineer systems that this UI could support, which means that the systems don't relate to each other in any kind of fun way. This is why so many indie games that try to be the next Pokemon, you can get your Pokemon, you can train your Pokemon, you can raise their stats, but it doesn't feel as impactful or as juicy because the underlying systems aren't locked together very well. Okay, well, if you shouldn't start with UI, then clearly you should start with game dev, right? You should design your game before you build it. I have a brilliant idea for a Pokemon game. It takes place on a 4x4 grid, and you can also rearrange the turn orders like this and this. My stats are much more nuanced and interesting, allowing for much more complicated high-level play. This is also a really unstable starting point. There's no way to know if your cool idea is actually going to work until you've at least partially implemented it. To make matters worse, even if it does work, the details are going to shift. This is a really unstable platform to try and stand on while developing your game. Obviously, you should have some good ideas going into your game about what you would like it to do. But starting from there, trying to create code that creates this interrelation, that's going to end up creating just as much difficulty for you as if you started from the UI. They are both very unstable starting points. So where do you start from? You start from spreadsheets. Whee! Spreadsheets. Oh yeah. Now we're cooking with gas. Look at my cool new Pokemon game, everybody. I made a spreadsheet. Obviously, you don't start by completing spreadsheets. You don't even really start by filling out spreadsheets. You start by creating spreadsheets. You start by creating empty spreadsheets. What am I talking about? A systems-based game is mostly about relating spreadsheets to other spreadsheets using various mechanisms. Like, if you're in a fight, you want to compare this Pokemon, an entry on one spreadsheet, to this Pokemon, an entry on another spreadsheet. And we will iteratively use these numbers to, fight. Oh, look, their health went down, their health went down. They used a power, they used a power. We are relating these two spreadsheet entries to each other. This is the fundamental nature of nearly every systems-based game. So this is where you should start. This is not a hard place to start. This is a fairly straightforward thing to do, but it can reveal that you were thinking really badly. You didn't really understand what you wanted, because what is a Pokemon? What spreadsheet does a Pokemon go onto, and what sort of stats does the Pokemon have? Oh look, we created the Pokemon spreadsheet. It's got all of our Pokemon on it, right? So this is their level and their name and all of that stuff is right here, right? How about their visual? Is there a visual here? A lot of people will instinctively try to create a monster or a Pokemon by adding the visual to the game world. Whether it's a sprite or a 3D model, they'll try and add it to the game world and then turn it into the monster. Like, okay, that's going to be our monster. But the game displays these characters differently depending on the UI that you're using. When you're in a hospital, do you spawn in the monster's battle visual, even though they're downed? If you're trying to pick them from a list, who's coming into the battle next? Do you want to take in your Porygon or what? Are you going to spawn in their battle animated sprites or their full 3D models for the drop-down menu where you select which one you're going to add? So the visuals have to be here, right? You have to put the visuals on this list because the UI is responsible for spawning in the visuals. This list contains their name, their stats, what powers they have, and what they look like, so that the UI can use that if needed. Or does it? Because it's not the Pokemon that look like something. It's the Pokemon species. Oh my God. There's another spreadsheet. There's a species spreadsheet. And that's what's got all the visuals defined on it. Here's the species name. Here's the species Pokedex entry. Here's the species starting stats. Here, of course, are the visuals. Here's some backstory blurb. In fact, this is a literal spreadsheet in the Pokemon universe. This is the Pokedex. Congratulations, you are creating the Pokedex as essentially an actual spreadsheet on your actual computer that you put into the video game world. And then every Pokemon here just points to their species starting spot on the spreadsheet, and that's how you get their visual. How about their powers? Well, I mean, Pokemon can learn powers from sources besides their species. So the species is going to have some powers, and when you learn those powers, and then the Pokemon is going to have a separate list. It's going to have to. What is a power? Okay. Well, I need to use a healing item on this Pokemon. What is a healing item? Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Wait a second. What healing items do I... Oh no. There's a separate spreadsheet for inventories and healing items. Wait a second. My Pokemon can wear outfits. Is that on the items spreadsheet, or is that on the separate spreadsheet specifically for outfits? Oh no. Oh no, so many spreadsheets. Wait, does this one relate to that? And then this is where you start. Now, I've given a sort of overwhelming example on purpose, but the point here is that you do not have to define all of these spreadsheets completely. Not only do you not have to fill them, you don't have to get them right. They can be wrong, because what matters is the fact that this space exists in your concept. If you decide that the way you're defining powers is wrong, you can switch that spreadsheet out. And you'll know which other spreadsheets were related to it, and you'll be able to figure out what nodes need to be re-related. And chances are it was all of the things that you were already thinking about when you realized you were defining powers wrong. The flow remains the same, even if the exact spreadsheet changes out. This is a very stable place to start. You can stand on these spreadsheets and build in any direction you please, and you will have a rock-solid place to stand. You want to start building up battles? Well, congratulations, these are the spreadsheets you need. We'll be relating them in these particular ways using the battle class. The actual functionality of the battle. We'll take those entries on those spreadsheets and relate them to each other in a very specific way. Oh, do we want to change how the battle works? Just do it. Just change how the battle works. There's no reliance between that and, say, the way that you encounter things on the world map, or the way that you have to use items, or the way that you spend money. Because we're working out from a central, stable foothold, we don't have to worry nearly as much about complex interrelations screwing up our program. If we change how a monster looks, we don't have to try and refactor hundreds of hours of work. If we change how the battle system relates to stats, we don't have to go back and change a million other things. We can just change the battle system. We can just change the visual. We can just change the items list. And if it is related to other places, it's related in a very flat data-to-data way, which we can easily tweak and replace. This is data-driven design, and that's something you've probably heard of, the idea of having data-driven games. This is what they're talking about. But the key here is, when we say data-driven design, we don't mean you have all the data. We mean you know how to drive all the data. We mean you know how the data relates and how it exists. This is where you start. You start with a bunch of empty spreadsheets. At least that's my opinion. Obviously, this is for systems-heavy games. If you're trying to make a racing game, this is way overkill. It's more important that, in any sort of action game, the juice is generally going to be more important. The moment-to-moment UI is critical in those games, and I can see designing that first in those games, but since I don't design those kinds of games, I wouldn't know. I do design these kinds of games, and this is a very stable way to get started. Understand the fundamental parts so that you can relate them to each other. Okay? Okay.